Michael Carter never heard the alarms. One moment he was gliding through the calm abyss of space aboard the stellar Voyager, his craft a modest but reliable vessel equipped for exploratory missions. The next, he was hurtling toward an alien planet, fire licking at the ship's hull as gravity took control. His last clear thought before impact was the haunting image of the swirling electromagnetic storm on his nav screen. A shimmering, multicolored vortex that seemed almost alive. When he awoke, everything was silent save for the faint hum of an alien wind brushing against the ship's shattered remains. Michael blinked, his head pounding, and groaned as he unclipped his harness. The air inside the cabin was warm and thin, tinged with the acrid scent of burnt wiring. He reached for his emergency oxygen mask, but stopped when his lungs expanded fully with a deep, unexpected breath. The air here, though strange, was breathable. The viewport was shattered, revealing a world bathed in hues that seemed too vibrant, too alive to be real. The sky glowed in a gradient of gold and violet, as though a perpetual sunset embraced the horizon. In the distance, towering trees with translucent spiraling leaves swayed like dancers, their colors shifting with the breeze. The ground beneath the wreckage was covered in a thick carpet of bioluminescent moss, each step Michael took leaving faint footprints of light that faded slowly behind him. He clutched at his side, feeling a sharp pain that turned out to be nothing more than bruised ribs. His survival instincts kicked in. The distress beacon! He stumbled back into the wreckage, searching for the emergency console. It was dead, every system fried beyond recognition. Damn it! He muttered under his breath, running a hand through his disheveled hair. His voice sounded small, swallowed by the vastness of the alien landscape. As he sifted through the wreckage for supplies, a flicker of movement caught his eye. He froze, every nerve in his body screaming at him to stay still. Emerging from the forest's edge were figures. Tall, humanoid shapes with skin the color of polished copper. They moved with an unhurried grace, their long limbs and elegant posture exuding an aura of calm. Michael's breath hitched as he realized they were completely nude, their forms unashamedly exposed. The first of them, a woman with flowing black hair that cascaded like liquid obsidian, stepped forward. Her eyes, large and almond-shaped, glimmered like liquid gold. She studied him intently, her gaze sharp yet curious, as though examining a creature she had never seen before. Michael, in his torn jumpsuit and bruised frame, felt every ounce of her scrutiny. He glanced at the group behind her, more women, each one as strikingly alien as the first, their coppery skin catching the sunlight in iridescent waves. They whispered to one another in a language he couldn't begin to understand, their voices melodic and soft, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Hello? Michael ventured, raising his hands in a gesture of peace, his voice cracked, betraying his nerves. The leader of the group tilted her head, her expression unreadable. Then, to Michael's shock, she responded. Not in words, but in a gentle hum that resonated deep within his chest, as though the sound was not just heard, but felt. The woman gestured toward him, then toward the forest, beckoning him to follow. Michael hesitated, his instincts torn between trust and caution. These beings didn't seem hostile, but the sheer alienness of them was enough to make his heart race. Okay, he muttered to himself. You're stranded? No distress beacon, no weapons? Let's just not get killed today. With cautious steps, he followed them into the forest. The village was unlike anything Michael had ever seen. Nestled in a clearing surrounded by towering crystalline trees, the settlement seemed to merge seamlessly with nature. Structures made of glowing translucent material spiraled upward like sculptures grown from the earth. Bridges of woven vines connected tree houses high above, and streams of liquid light coursed through canals carved into the mossy ground. As Michael entered, the hum of activity ceased. Dozens of women stopped what they were doing, their golden eyes locking onto him. Their expressions ranged from awe to something resembling reverence, and Michael's unease grew with every step. The women began to gather around him, murmuring among themselves in that melodic, resonant language. He felt like an exhibit in a museum, a strange artifact unearthed from another time and place. His cheeks flushed, the weight of their stares pressing on him like a physical force. The leader of the group raised her hand, and the crowd fell silent. She turned to Michael, her gaze soft but commanding. Slowly, she placed her hand over her chest and spoke a single word. "Kayla!" Michael blinked, unsure if it was a name, a greeting, or something else entirely. She repeated the gesture and the word, her tone patient but firm. "Kayla," Michael repeated, pointing at her. She smiled faintly, then gestured to him. "Michael," he said hesitantly, pointing to himself. The crowd erupted in whispers, the name repeated like a prayer among them. Michael. Michael. Kayla gestured for him to follow her into the largest structure in the village, a spiraling tower of glowing stone and living vines. Inside, the air was cooler, the walls pulsing faintly with light. Kayla led him to a circular room where a pool of shimmering liquid reflected the golden light of the sky above. She knelt by the pool, gesturing for him to sit. Michael hesitated, but the exhaustion of the day overtook him. As he lowered himself onto the soft, mossy floor, Kayla began to hum again, her voice filling the room with a resonance that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. The sound was soothing, almost hypnotic, and for the first time since the crash, Michael allowed himself to relax. But as he looked into the shimmering pool and saw his own reflection, a bruised, wide-eyed man surrounded by an alien world, he realized just how far from home he truly was. The hum of Kayla's voice faded, and she looked at him with a mixture of kindness and expectation. Michael didn't know what she wanted from him, but he had the sinking feeling that his arrival on this planet was no accident. It was only the beginning. Michael awoke to the soft caress of sunlight filtering through translucent walls. The alien tower was alive with light and sound. Subtle vibrations thrummed through the air, accompanied by distant, harmonious tones that seemed to emanate from the structure itself. For a fleeting moment, he forgot where he was. Then the memories came rushing back, the crash, the forest, the village, and the group of women with their unblinking stares and melodic whispers. He sat up on the mossy bedding provided to him and winced as his bruised ribs protested. His surroundings were strange but undeniably beautiful. The room pulsed faintly, as if it were breathing, its walls shifting between hues of soft lavender and gold. The floor was covered in a glowing, velvety moss that emitted warmth. Whatever this place was, it seemed both organic and technological, a seamless fusion of nature and innovation. A faint rustle drew his attention. Kayla entered, her coppery skin catching the morning light. She carried a tray of strange fruits and a translucent pitcher filled with liquid that shimmered like liquid starlight. Her movements were fluid, unhurried, and her golden eyes studied him with a calm intensity that made him feel exposed, while she was not. "Michael," she said, her voice deliberate as though she were testing the weight of his name on her tongue. "Good morning, I think," he replied awkwardly, unsure of the time or even if this planet adhered to the same concepts of day and night. Kayla tilted her head, clearly not understanding his words. She placed the tray on the moss beside him and gestured for him to eat. Michael hesitated, his stomach growling. The fruits looked alien. One was a deep blue orb with a smooth surface that shimmered faintly. Another was spiky and oozed a fragrant golden liquid. Despite his reservations, he reached for the blue fruit and bit into it cautiously. A burst of sweetness and tang exploded on his tongue, and for the first time since the crash, Michael felt something close to joy. Kayla watched him eat, her lips curling into a faint smile. Then she pointed to herself and repeated, "Kayla." Michael nodded. "Kayla." He pointed to her, then to himself, "Michael." The exchange seemed to delight her. She tapped her temple and began to hum, the now familiar resonance filling the room. The hum wasn't just a sound, it was a vibration that seemed to carry meaning. As the tones shifted, she gestured toward the window, the village, and finally to herself and him. "You're trying to explain something," Michael muttered, though the nuances of her hum were lost on him. Kayla's brows furrowed in frustration, and she stood, motioning for him to follow. Michael finished the fruit quickly, wiped his hands on his jumpsuit, and trailed after her. The village was awake and bustling. Women moved gracefully through the clearing, their coppery skin gleaming in the light. Some carried bundles of crystalline leaves, others tended to floating spheres of light that seemed to hover around the settlement. As Michael passed, every pair of golden eyes turned to him. Conversations paused, heads tilted, and reverent whispers followed him like an echo. Michael shifted uncomfortably under their gazes, feeling more like an artifact than a person. Kayla seemed unbothered by the attention, her stride steady as she led him toward a central gathering area. At the heart of the village was a massive circular space, bordered by stones that glowed faintly with intricate symbols. A crowd had already gathered, their hums weaving together in a complex, harmonious melody. At the center of the gathering, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair stood. Her presence commanded attention, her movements slow but deliberate, like a queen presiding over her court. Kayla brought Michael forward, and the crowd parted to let them through. The silver-haired woman regarded him with an expression that was equal parts wonder and calculation. "Saila," Kayla said, gesturing toward the woman. Michael nodded, repeating the name, "Silena." Saila stepped closer, her height and regal bearing making Michael feel small. She reached out, her fingers grazing his shoulder lightly, and spoke in a tone that was both commanding and reverent. Though he couldn't understand her words, her meaning was clear. She was welcoming him, perhaps blessing him. Michael felt a pang of unease. It was the way she looked at him, not as a person, but as something sacred, something to be revered. As the day unfolded, Michael learned more about the village and its people through Kayla. Using gestures, expressions, and the occasional hum, she began to piece together a rudimentary form of communication. The women revered him, not as an individual, but as a man, a rare and precious being on this planet. Through fragmented explanations, Michael came to understand that Lysara had suffered a catastrophic genetic anomaly centuries ago, drastically reducing the male population. The anomaly, combined with Lysaran physiology, made natural predisposition among many interstellar races, made natural born for the first time. Men were sacred, not just because of their rarity, but because they represented the survival of the species. As Kayla guided him through the village, Michael saw how this reverence translated into control. The few men he encountered were sequestered, guarded closely by groups of women. They seemed content, even pampered, but their every move was watched, their lives orchestrated by those around them. The realization sent a chill through Michael. The attention he'd received since his arrival wasn't simply fascination, it was expectation. That evening, Kayla took him to the edge of the village, where the forest opened onto a wide plain dotted with glowing flowers. She gestured for him to sit, and they gazed out at the alien sunset together, the sky ablaze with colors no human eyes were meant to see. Kayla hummed softly, and Michael could sense the sadness in the sound. She tapped her chest, then gestured toward the village, her expression conflicted. "You don't like it here either," Michael guessed. This system." Kayla didn't respond directly, but her gaze lingered on the horizon as though searching for something far beyond her reach. As the first stars appeared in the alien sky, Michael felt a flicker of understanding pass between them. Though their worlds were vastly different, they shared something profound, a longing for freedom. For the first time since the crash, Michael allowed himself to hope. The days passed in a strange rhythm, marked by rituals and expectations Michael couldn't entirely grasp. Every morning, Kayla brought him food, glowing fruits, crystalline nuts, and liquid that sparkled like stars. And every afternoon, she led him through the village, helping him understand the people's customs and language. Slowly, he pieced together the fragments of their world, and with each revelation, his unease grew. Men here were revered, yes, but their lives were tightly controlled, their roles reduced to symbolic importance and reproduction. They were seen as the embodiment of life itself, rare, precious, and fragile. Reverence, Michael realized, was just another word for captivity. The first cracks in Michael's facade appeared during a village assembly. Kayla had warned him it would be important, an event to formally decide his place in Lysaran society. The gathering took place in a large open space near the village's center, surrounded by glowing stones etched with ancient symbols. The leaders of the village stood in a circle, their presence as commanding as the towering crystalline trees overhead. Saila, the silver-haired matriarch, stood at the forefront, her golden eyes fixed on Michael. The other women whispered among themselves, their melodic voices weaving an intricate harmony that set Michael's teeth on edge. Kayla stood by his side, her posture rigid. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Stay silent," she whispered in Lysaran, a phrase she'd taught him earlier that day. "Let them decide." The words struck him like a blow. Let them decide? He was a man, not a relic to be bartered over. Michael clenched his fists but forced himself to nod. Sayela stepped forward and began to speak, her voice a measured melody of authority and reverence. Kayela translated in low whispers. She says you are a gift from the stars. You represent hope and prosperity for our people. Michael barely listened. His attention was on the crowd, the way their golden eyes never left him, the way their hums seemed to vibrate in the air. He felt like a prize on display, his humanity stripped away by their reverence. When Saya finished speaking, another woman stepped forward. This one was younger, her coppery skin glinting like polished metal. Her tone was more forceful, almost confrontational. She says, You should be safeguarded, kept apart from the rest of the village to ensure your safety and sanctity, Kayla translated. Michael's heart pounded. Kept apart? Like a trophy locked in a case? His frustration boiled over, and before he could stop himself, he spoke. "No," he said, his voice firm and clear. The crowd fell silent, their hums dissipating like smoke. Every pair of golden eyes turned to him, wide with surprise. Even Kayla stared, her mouth slightly open. Michael took a step forward, addressing the assembly. He didn't know if they could understand him, but he didn't care. "I am not a relic. I'm not a sacred object to be hidden away. I am a person, I have a life, and I have a right to decide what happens to it." Kayla recovered quickly, her voice rising above the stunned murmurs as she translated his words. The response was immediate. The crowd erupted into a cacophony of hums and whispers, some in agreement, others in protest. Ciela raised her hand, silencing them with a single motion. Her golden eyes narrowed as she regarded Michael. For the first time, he saw something in her gaze that wasn't reverence, it was calculation. Later that evening, Kayla found Michael sitting at the edge of the village, staring out at the alien wilderness. The plains stretched endlessly before him, glowing flowers swaying gently in the wind, their light creating an otherworldly dance across the landscape. "You shouldn't have spoken," Kayla said, her voice low but not unkind. Michael didn't turn to look at her. What was I supposed to do? Let them lock me away? Treat me like a museum piece? "They wouldn't harm you," she said, sitting beside him. "You're too important." "Important? You mean useful?" Michael shook his head. "You don't see it because you've grown up with it, but this reverence is a prison. I don't want to be important if it means I can't live my life." Caleb was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You're right," she said finally. "I've questioned our traditions for years, but to speak against them is dangerous, Michael. You don't understand the weight of what you did today." "Then help me," he said, turning to face her. "You're the only one here who seems to care what I think. Help me get out of here. Help me be free." Kayla hesitated, her golden eyes searching his face. "You don't understand what you're asking. The wilderness isn't kind, Michael. There are storms, predators, dangers you can't imagine. And even if you survived, where would you go? This planet is vast, and Lysara is the only civilization. There's nowhere else to escape to." Michael's shoulders slumped, the weight of her words settling over him. She was right. Escape wasn't a solution, it was suicide. Over the following days, Michael and Kayla formed a tentative alliance. She began to teach him more about Lysara, its geography, its history, and the customs that governed its people. In return, he shared fragments of his own story, painting a picture of Earth that seemed to fascinate and sadden her in equal measure. Through their conversations, Michael learned that Kayla was not just a caretaker, she was a dissenter. For years, she had questioned the rigid traditions of her people, the way men were revered but silenced, the way women were bound by roles they didn't choose. But questioning was dangerous, and open rebellion was unthinkable. "I stayed silent because I didn't believe change was possible," Kayla admitted one night as they sat beneath the glowing trees. "But you're different. You speak when you shouldn't. You defy when you should submit. Maybe that's what we need." Michael met her gaze, his heart pounding. For the first time since the crash, he felt a glimmer of hope, not just for himself, but for the possibility of something greater. But the glimmer was fragile, like a flame in the wind. and Michael knew that the path ahead would be anything but easy. The great hall of the village pulsed with energy. Its towering, translucent walls seemed to vibrate in rhythm with the hums of the crowd gathered below, their voices weaving together in a melodic yet discordant symphony. Michael stood in the center of the chamber, his heart pounding as dozens of golden eyes bore into him. At his side, Keola stood straight and steady, though Michael could sense the tension in her posture. This was it, the moment they'd been building toward. A gathering of Lysara's leaders, not just from this village but from neighboring settlements, had come to decide his fate. The matriarchs, resplendent in their bearing and authority, formed a semicircle around him. At the head of the assembly was Cyela, her silver-streaked hair glowing faintly in the ambient light, her expression as calm and inscrutable as ever. Caleb had warned him about this gathering. "They will want to define you," she had said the night before, "to categorize and control you, as they've always done with men. Speak carefully, or they will make the choice for you." But Michael had no intention of speaking carefully. The hums faded into silence as Saya raised her hand, her gaze fixed firmly on Michael. She began to speak, her words slow and deliberate, her voice resonating with authority. "She says this meeting is to decide your role in our society," Kayla whispered, translating softly in Michael's ear. "Your presence is seen as a blessing, but they fear the disruption you've caused. They must determine how to honor you and how to contain you." Michael's jaw tightened. Contain. The word rang in his ears like a warning bell. He clenched his fists, willing himself to remain calm as Sayla continued. Kayla translated again, her voice quieter now. "They propose assigning you to a sanctum, a protected place where you will live under constant watch. They believe it is for your safety, but it will also ensure you cannot interfere." Michael's patience snapped. "No," he said, his voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. Gasps rippled through the crowd, their melodic hums rising in a dissonant wave. Saila's golden eyes narrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line. Michael took a step forward, his voice firm and steady. "I'm not a relic. I'm not a symbol. I'm a person, and I have a right to live my life freely. If you truly revere men as you say, then respect me enough to let me choose my own path." The crowd erupted in whispers, their voices a chaotic symphony of shock and outrage. Even Kaela seemed taken aback, though she quickly composed herself and began translating his word. Sayela raised her hand again, silencing the room with a single motion. She spoke, her tone sharper now, the cadence of her words clipped and precise. "She says your defiance is dangerous," Kayla translated. "She warns that freedom is a risk not only to you but to everyone here. If you reject their protection, you endanger the balance of our society." Michael took another step forward, his voice rising. "Your balance isn't my responsibility. I didn't choose to be here. I didn't ask for your reverence or your protection. All I want is the freedom to live my life on my own terms." Kayla's voice trembled slightly as she translated, her golden eyes flicking nervously toward the matriarchs. The room was tense, the hums rising again in an uneasy harmony. It was then that a younger woman stepped forward from the crowd. Her coppery skin gleamed in the faint light, and her expression was fierce. She looked at Sila, then at Michael, and spoke in a voice that was clear and strong. Kayla translated, her voice steady now. "She says Michael is right. Our traditions have kept us safe, but they have also kept us stagnant. Perhaps it's time to reconsider what freedom means, not just for men, but for all of us." The crowd stirred, some murmuring in agreement, others shaking their heads. Saila's expression darkened, her calm facade cracking for the first time. She spoke again, her voice low and commanding. "She says this is not just about you, Michael," Kayla translated. "If you refuse to submit, you risk destabilizing everything we have built. She asks if you are willing to bear the consequences of such a choice." Michael hesitated, the weight of her words sinking in. He glanced at Kayla, who met his gaze with quiet determination. "Freedom always comes with consequences," Michael said, his voice firm. "But I'd rather face those consequences than live a life that isn't mine." Kayla's translation carried his conviction, and for a moment the room was silent. The standoff continued late into the night. Arguments erupted among the matriarchs, some defending Michael's right to choose, others insisting that his defiance would lead to chaos. The crowd grew restless, their hums rising and falling like a storm. Finally, Sayela raised her hand again, her voice cutting through the noise. She spoke slowly, her tone heavy with finality. "She says you will have your freedom," Kayla translated, her voice trembling with disbelief. "But it will come at a cost. You must leave this place. If you refuse their protection, you cannot stay in the village." Michael's breath caught. Leave the village? The wilderness beyond was vast and perilous, filled with creatures and dangers he couldn't begin to comprehend. "You don't have to do this," Kayla whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes, I do," Michael replied, his gaze steady. The next morning, Michael stood at the edge of the village, a small pack of supplies slung over his shoulder. The women had gathered to watch him leave, their expressions a mixture of sadness, awe, and confusion. Kayla stood beside him, her golden eyes shining with unshed tears. She reached out and took his hand, her grip firm. "You're braver than I thought," she said softly. "So are you," Michael replied. Kayla hesitated, then stepped closer. "I can't stay here either, not after what we've done. If you'll have me, I'll go with you." Michael stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "You don't have to." "I know," she said, cutting him off, "but I want to." Together they stepped into the wilderness, leaving the village behind. The glowing flowers swayed in the wind, their light casting a faint path ahead. For the first time since his crash, Michael felt something he hadn't dared to hope for: freedom. But as the forest loomed before them, its crystalline trees stretching endlessly into the horizon, he knew their journey was only beginning.